Hi, everybody. How are you doing this morning? Hope everybody's having a great last day of your BB Dev Days. So thanks for joining today. So today we're going to talk about your Power Automate and ask you have a whole panel of experts to ask any kind of question that you want to. It looks like we have 56 people in here and still growing. So no intimidation there, panel. So we got a lot of great minds in here from Blackbaud. We have Glen, Hutson, McLean, Ashley Moose. And then there's going to be some others that are going to be joining us as well. Please be sure to ask your questions over in the chat or in Q&A. If you feel like your question is going to be a little bit long-winded, raise your hand and I'll bring you up on stage where you can ask your question if you want to. So this is just going to be a free-flowing session. So Ashley, Heather, Glen, and Heather, I can't remember the names you said may be joining, but I'll be watching for the hand raised so I can pull them into the stage as well. Oh, they're there.
You can't, you got to know Austin Brown's name. There's very few people in this community that don't know Austin. So hi, Austin.
Oh, my video doesn't work.
Oh, no. Uh-oh. See if you can turn it back on. There we go. Oh, well, at least we're getting closer.
Ah, here we go. That should solve it.
There we go.
Hi.
Hello.
Wonderful. I'm seeing if we've got any Q&A coming in. I love all of you saying good morning to each other. Okay, we got a good softball here from Robin. Thanks, Robin. Who wants to take this one? You want to go, Austin?
I can't see them, so you're going to have to read them out.
No, I'm just going to approve it, and then I think it's going to come up on the stage. Isn't that right?
Oh, yes. Okay. Let's see here. It says, how does an absolute beginner get started learning how this all works? I'm eager to learn, but have found all the how-to sessions to be a certain level of knowledge. That's a great question. So I would recommend that you take a class through Blackbaud University if you have the Learn subscription. Or there are some on-demand videos that Blackbaud has put out over the years called the Accelerator course. And you can watch those on your own time. And those are a great place to start. That will give you a good foundation. And then I recommend starting with a gift notification. It'll just be a digest in an email, and it's a great first starter flow. And from there, download more templates from the template showcase. And how I learned was going through the Accelerator course and then looking through people's templates to figure out how they did things. And then over time, my knowledge expanded.
I would also add to that, the Microsoft Learn training, they're really good to just get a basic knowledge of Power Automate. You know, everything that Austin described is going to go through a very basic way as well, specific to Blackbaud. But there is also value in just going through some of the beginning Microsoft Learn sessions because they'll just go over a little bit more Power Automate specific knowledge.
Great question. All right, I think Glen, you're going to go up next. So let me see if I can switch the question. There we go.
So one question that came in is, can anyone explain how API calls work within Power Automate? The great thing is that if you're using our Power Automate connector, if you add the Power Automate connector to your environment and you're using our standard connectors and what have you, that does not count against your API flows because it routes through our connectors and not your system, even though you're connecting to your system. So anything that you're routing through the standard connectors there, even the send HTTP request, that's Blackbaud's API limits and not yours. Now, if you do go through and create some of your own, custom connectors or things like that and what have you, that may actually hit some of your APIs. That really depends. But again, if you're actually using our connectors, using the, you've got the Power Automate app added to your environment, that does not count against your APIs. Now, one thing to keep in mind as well, if you're doing anything that does actually work toward APIs, APIs is not the number of records that you get or ask for. It is the number of questions you ask of the API and the number of responses. So even outside the fact that if you route everything through the Power Automate official stuff, it doesn't count. When it does start counting, again, it is, you can ask a single, how many gifts, and you can get 500 back. That still counts as, that doesn't count as 500 calls. It just counts as one. So it's just information there.
Wonderful. Trying to see, we just got a good one from Brooke Johnson. So I'm going to get this one up on the stage and we'll see if any of you guys want to answer. And we might bring a few more community all-stars up. Let me see if I can get some more recruits to come up on the stage with us. Keep your questions flowing, folks. All right. What are some of the most useful automations you've seen? We want inspiration.
I personally really like the data cleanup automations, because then that's things that I don't necessarily have to pay attention to. I can tell the robot to go and find all my emails that are marked do not contact and change the type for me. I can direct it to go look for dirty data and clean it up on my behalf. I'm also a huge fan of acknowledgement letters, just because that can be such a tedious process. And when you automate it, it's just a wonderful feeling to get an email that says all your letters are merged. Go look at them.
I've also seen some where it's replacing a manual task that really wasn't needed. So I was working with an organization that had some existing smart sheets and forms that they would use to request like fundraiser assignment or to change some, maybe move a prospect to a different person. And so previously their workflow was they would submit the request through a Smartsheet form. Once their manager, whoever approved it on Smartsheet, then another person actually had to manually go in and make that update. So instead, there had several flows. It's just an example of one of those where they were able to take that approval step. So once something was marked as approved on the Smartsheet, and that's the trigger that then goes and actually does the manual work that the other person was having to do. So just little things like that, where it's like you have all this stuff kind of built in that neatly works into automations already, and it just takes out the manual work.
Anybody else want to layer on useful automations before we move to the next question? Haley, you came up.
I did. So I would say, and I put this in the chat as well, like if you want inspiration, all you need to do is come to the monthly user groups, because you'll get so many ideas there. One of the most useful automations that I've used has been to automate our acknowledgement letter process. That was a big hot thing, last year at this time with all the changes that rolled out. And there are some great templates out there that will help you automate that. And it just drops it into files, which you can print. You can edit them if you need to. It's been really helpful in our organization.
Wonderful. And we got some more all-stars up on the stage. So you talk about our user groups, and these folks are what make it great. So we've got Ellen Smith up on the stage from Conservation International, still the top watched YouTube, I think, video on Sky Developer YouTube for her development dashboard. So still winning there. And let's see, we've got some questions coming in. So we were just talking about thank you letter automation. So let's stick there for just a moment, and then I'll move on to another topic. This is from Ryan. Do the thank you letter automations you're talking about return editable Word files, or is it all PDF files? So I know Haley and Austin, you love acknowledgement letters, and any guidance there on the file formats that are supported?
They can be anything you want, pretty much. Most of the ones I've built return Word files. So either one file where all the letters are merged together, or I've even done versions where they're merged by letter code, kind of thing, because certain people want to look at like letters together. So yeah, lots of different ways to do lots of different things, as is Power Automate with every answer.
All right, I'm trying to catch all the questions happening in the chat, and I love all of the community action and support, especially Alex Wong helping to answer questions in the chat. Would we expect anything else from Alex? I don't think so, with how prolific he is in the community with helping people. So let's move on to another topic. Let's see. Oh, well, no, let's stick with acknowledgements. We've got one more question on that, so I won't bounce around on topics here. Let's move to Anita. So the acknowledgement letters are hot here in the Q&A. Does anyone pull in funds? I'm trying to wrap my mind around how they are stored in arrays. Glen, Hutson, I know that this is a topic that you can speak on with the one-to-many scenarios. Is that something you'd be willing to share?
I'm sorry, I was answering another question, so I didn't hear the first part of yours.
I can take this one if you want.
Go for it.
So funds are interesting in that if you want to include fund information in your letters, you need to do a couple extra steps. So you need to go into the Razor's Edge, fundraise connector. I always type in fund, so I don't know what the full word is. But you put the split gift fund from the original get a gift action into a get a fund. It will go into an apply to each because it's a one-to-many. But then you can use a variable or another action like that can store information to then save that so you can use that in your flow or in your letter. Sorry.
All right. Well, we got one more, I promise, and then we are going to move on. Once you produce the letters, how are you mass emailing them, whether they're in PDF or Word format? Getting them sent to the right person without sending one by one is something we struggle with. We're currently using a process outside of RENXT so we can both edit the letters and still send en masse.
I'm happy to.
Or want to go, Haley? Okay.
Yeah. So I think this is Audrey. I think this is a really interesting question, and because we face the same thing. So our organization, we kind of lean into the IRS regulation of, the acknowledgement, but from $250 or more. But what we do is, instead of not acknowledging anything less than that, we just choose to acknowledge digitally gifts of less than $250. But then 250 or more, we do a printed acknowledgement. So that process really starts with being able to take a list and do one thing with one group of gifts and a different process with a different group of gifts. And so we really leverage, and this is important to our organization, is really leveraging Razor's Edge NXT and the out of the box features that they offer. So we use the receipting component that is available to digitally receipt those gifts when possible, when they're under that $250 threshold. So we have a whole process that takes those gifts and those get digitally receipted. And then anything else that's left at the end of the day, our flow runs after our gift entry cut off for the day. Anything that's still remaining out there as unacknowledged then goes into the printed acknowledgement process. So we've kind of built that in. It's separate processes, but then it all is, based in, we use RENXT where we can, and then where we really want to automate the acknowledgement letters that we print out, we add that as an automation. So that's where we use the extensibility component. I hope that answered your question.
That's great. And I love the focus on first, let's use out of the box functionality and then customize where we need it. I'm going to put this question from Noah up on the board here. It's a little bit long, but Noah is expressing some concerns about data exposure. And so can we speak to where data goes, lives when using Power Platform apps with Razor's Edge NXT? Concerns about this are one of my biggest hurdles to moving forward with the apps. We don't want to get into a situation where a breach somewhere such as Microsoft results in our constituent data being exposed. So first, I'm going to do a shout out. If you did not go to Ben Wong's session, that happened earlier, right? I think I had a preview on cybersecurity for low code. That is absolutely a session that you should go back and watch on demand if you were not there live. Noah and others that have concerns about this. Power Platform and the Power Automate connectors are just wrappers around the Sky API. So this is data sort of in transfer. So that falls under all of the privacy that you have related to your Blackbaud solution and Sky API. But you're right, when you are moving data out of your Razor's Edge NXT or your Blackbaud solution, that then becomes essentially yours, right? And your data, you've moved it outside of Blackbaud's into your own systems. And therefore you then take ownership of protecting that data and the governance around it. So it's a valid concern. Using the connectors themselves is very secure. But once you do extract data, and that's why I think maybe one of the ways that we like and that we prefer is that you're actually not moving data out at all. Like if you're able to use sort of, and Glen teaches this quite a bit, a Sky add-in, right, to present data from a system without actually moving data from one place to the next. So if there's data that you have in Razor's Edge or another Blackbaud solution that you would like to see transformed in a different way, it need not leave that solution in order for you to present it in a different way. So where you can rely on those sorts of frameworks for integration is the most secure without moving the data outside of the system. But does anybody else have any pointers on security that they'd like to share before we move to another question?
Yeah, Heather, I recently attended a cybersecurity seminar, and the keynote speaker there, he basically said that for anybody in the data world, we have to kind of approach this, and I thought it was really interesting. We have to approach that, while we don't want our data to be exposed, it is our responsibility to kind of acknowledge that is a risk. And so if you come at your data usage from that standpoint, you can do things and manage your data and what is getting shared and how it's getting shared and when, and to limit the risk of the data that is being moved or transported. So I think, if you are, for example, doing acknowledgement letters, how many of the personal information indicators are being added or moved around might be something that you would consider whenever you're creating those flows, and maybe trying to stay under any kind of limits. And I think, what is it, like 3 could be considered a breach or something, like I can't remember right off the top of my head, but I think it's something that's interesting that if you just approach it, that at some point in that time, your data is going to be at risk. What could you do now to limit what that would mean for your organization?
Really, really good advice.
And one thing I would mention as well is that when you create connections through the API and through Power Automate, the permissions of the connection is based on the person that when you're logging in, you're putting those credentials into the connector. It is those permissions that are being used in order to help transfer and read data. So if you don't, so keep that in mind, you may want to create a user that may not have, for the purposes of connecting the connectors or connecting to the API, that may not have supervisor rights, may not have the carte blanche rights and whatever. We've got various other levels of that as well. But if you're creating stuff that is purely going to be to read, just basic gift data, then maybe create a user that doesn't necessarily do all of that. All that data stuff. So it can get a bit in the weeds because we've got different layers you can do that. But one thing to keep in mind as well is that, the permission of the data to read is based on the user that you're using for the connectors. And so maybe perhaps, even use a user that doesn't have access to the data that you would not actually be needing for any automation.
Mhm.
Was that clear as mud? I can certainly rephrase that. I was thinking as I was talking.
Can I
Yeah.
add something, Heather?
Yes.
Heather? Sorry.
Yes.
I just wanted to add, this isn't for Automate, but for Power BI. My IT people are pretty strict, and they won't let me make HTTP calls and limit connectors. So all of my Power BI files run through Q, and then we drag them over to a SharePoint site from hosted. So I think that is, if you're using BI and you don't want to expose anything, Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's just pretty much going from your Blackbaud site to your
I think if I can complete Helen's thought, into your Microsoft environment. Yeah.
There's also a setting that IT can use on the back end of your Power Automate environment. Sorry, I only know about Power Automate. I think it's called like it's a DLP, like a data loss policy or something like that. And what that really does is it limits the apps that the data that flows through Power Automate can talk to, so the various connectors you can use. So if you're particularly worried about your data being sent somewhere else by Power Automate, you can use one of those to sort of limit its scope.
Yep. And that's a really good point. So before I move on, I will drop this link into the chat here. This is the Microsoft Center of Excellence Starter Kit. It's completely free. This is something that you as IT professional, or you can share with your IT professionals in your organization, that they can bring in, that helps monitor and highlight where there could be potential risk. And this is not just with Blackbaud solutions. This is any use case that is using Power Platform. So it even includes really nice Power BI dashboards that help to monitor flows and who's using them and how they're accessing them. So it's a good governance and monitoring tool. So go ahead and take a look at that. So we're going to move on. Ashley, I'm going to put you onto the hot seat for just a second, not to answer this when question, but to talk about what options there are available when you don't have a connector available. So Lauren was asking about the possibility of an education management connector coming. And I think we want to share that. Don't let that stop you. So Ashley, can you talk about options?
Absolutely, yes. So in lieu of an official connector being available, there is the Blackbaud Sky add-ins connector, which contains the send an HTTP request action. And using that action, you can connect to any of the Sky API endpoints. So really with that, you can connect to education management. There are some, depending on what you want to do, there are some limits there with being able to use it for patch functionality, so updates. But there are other workarounds that you can do that'll get you there. Wonderful. And yes, yeah, Austin, I saw that you had presented earlier this week, and they just had a post out there in the community on from no code to low code HTTP requests. So definitely recommend checking that out.
Wonderful. So Lauren, don't let that hold you back. But yes, we do want to continue to expand our connector programs. I hope you got some good coming soon messages here at BB Dev Days about new connectors coming. So there is a possibility. It's not currently planned, but don't let that hold you back. Okay. We've got some pretty specific questions here in the chat just around creating flows. So I'm going to, let's start with Morgan's question here. Very specific question. What does do until do, or what situation does one use it? I've Googled it, but I'm struggling to understand the computer words. So anybody want to take a do until? I see a hand.
I can answer that, and I have a real world use case.
Great.
So a do until is basically, it's a loop within Power Automate. So it will repeat the things within that loop until it meets a certain condition. An example of this is I have a data cleanup flow for phones, and I use an HTTP call to get all the phones changed in the last 24 hours. And I want, and because that could be more than 5,000, right? There's a 5,000 limit on items returned through the API. I have a do until set up to loop through that initial list call so that if it goes beyond 5,000, it will keep going until everything is looked at that was changed the day before. So it's a little bit tricky, but using some increment variables, you can set up that top condition so that it will do until and counts match. Yeah.
Ashley, Glenn, any other do until scenarios you've used it for? I'm trying to rack my brain. I know I used it in one, but I can't remember what it was. It's not coming to me.
I've used it in other scenarios too. I mean, the like list whatever, probably the most common. But I have also used it in a couple of scenarios where I was actually just doing updates where the amount of data that we had was more than 5,000 records. So needed it in a do until loop to not have to just manually then go back through and move it to the next set. But it's really anything where you're hitting that 5,000 limit and you need something else to continue happening. That is the key as to when you want that do until. And it could be a different limit, whatever the limit is on your action. So whatever that limit is, if you're hitting that and you need an action to be continuing, do until is probably what you need to use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's coming back to me. I think I used that in one of the flows around the birthdays. So that I had out in the day. So that was where I used that do until so that it could continue to proceed through the flow, even though I might have not been able to complete a particular action in the flow. So yeah, that totally makes sense. That was a good question. Hopefully, Morgan, we helped you out with that. I've got another sort of technical question. So while we're on this vein, let's take a question from James. Is there a better way to manage initializing variables rather than having a long string of actions at the top of your flow? I don't know. I sort of thought that having the long string of actions at the top of your flow was the better way. But
I think that's a requirement of the system.
Well, so this is a passion of mine.
Okay.
Let me talk. Yeah. So Alex and I are on the same page. So you only need to use a variable unless if it's going to be changing through the process of the flow. If you're only going to be using a variable to capture information you're going to use later, it's not going to be changing the flow. Use a compose. Alex just mentioned the same thing within chat. So I use that. I've got to the point now that I rarely use variables anymore. There are some cases of using a variable that is counting stuff that's been added up or whatever through the purpose of a flow, or if it is something that is going to change through the course of a flow or what have you, that value is going to change. That's when you use variable. But if you're basically just creating a variable just to hold something that's going to stay static through the course of the flow, you're just doing it so you don't have to go and dig through the flow to make a change somewhere else, then use the compose. Now, unfortunately, all you see in the label, the compose, is the word outputs. Unlike a variable, when you're putting the variable somewhere, you do see the name of the variable. So the downside is you can have a lot of different compose statements, but you can actually certainly go through and just, hey, use those composes. And the nice thing about using the composes, and I know we're getting to the top of the hour, is it makes it easier to copy those whole chunks of code and a scope or something from one flow to the other without having to worry about going back and grabbing that variable. So again, only use variables if it's really going to change through the course of the flow. If you're really just using something as a holder for a value that's not going to change, you just want to hold it one place and use it later, use a compose, and just make sure you label the compose appropriately, not just 1, 2, 3, 4. That's going to be a huge time saver in regards to, or even patience savior in regards to working with those things.
That being said, I disagree. I like using variables because it's very easy when you're looking through the flow later on to see what information is being used in that particular place. So I don't mind the wall of purple actions at the top of
Yeah, there's definitely different options.
Yeah, there's pros and cons, right?
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
each their own. And there's
Yeah,
there's like at least 4 or 5 ways to do everything within Power Automate. So
it's sometimes an art and not a science and personal preference. And it might be because, practices evolve over time as we all like build our skills. So back when we started that accelerator course back in the day, we created these walls of variables at the top, and that was just the way we did things. And
how dare you? Now that's where
Austin,
I live. That's my hill to die on.
And so that was someone's personal preference that then we, imparted to the community. And now a lot of folks do that. But I can say, like, initializing, I can see both views. The one comment that I want to make is, the variables can be helpful, especially if you have, I guess, a lot of collaborators that are using that flow, or just from a succession planning standpoint. Like, if there are lots of places that are configured in the flow that use the same thing, like an email address of your executive director, or this, that, or the other, having those up at the top can make it a little bit more manageable when there's groups or collaborators managing flows. All right. I know, Glenn, you said it's the top of the hour, but like we don't stop at 11. We go all the way to 11:15, and we need your questions. We've only got, we don't have any more in the Q&A. Let me see if there are any hot ones over in the chat, or take a moment and see if you've got a question that you want to get into the Q&A before we close out. Let's see.
I've got something that's been a hot topic that I'll mention that might have been a hot topic in the community, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, please do.
So one of the things, and I just mentioned not to pick on any, if you're in the audience, this is not a picking on right now, but one of the things that the great thing about Power Automate, and even though it's a Microsoft Office, it's a Microsoft tool, it does integrate with various other systems. It even integrates with Google, even though it sounds like you're matter and antimatter. It does definitely integrate with Google. So the key thing is that you may see some examples that if you're a Google shop and you see an example that is using, for example, Outlook, or you're an Outlook shop that is using, example, Gmail, or what have you, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be logged into, if somebody posts something that says, hey, I'm using Gmail, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to use Gmail. It's just what that organization is doing. And I see this question pop up from time to time. It says, I don't use Gmail, or I don't use Outlook. Can I still use this flow that somebody's posted? And the answer is yes, you can. Just everybody, as has been mentioned in the chat, is that yes, this is sort of like RE. You can do things 20,000 different ways. And so definitely you're going to have people that approach it different ways there. So just some things I see kind of pop up every once in a while, that if you're starting to see examples, if they're using this tool, this email, this sheet, this form tool, or whatever, doesn't mean you're locked into that to do the same thing.
Yeah, that is
soapbox for a second.
No, you had the stage, so you should go ahead and do it. This is a great question from Brooke. Thank you, Brooke. I'm interested in setting up more automated tasks, but I'm worried about accidentally setting something up that doesn't work correctly. Any advice on issues to look out for when starting out, or ways to extensively test the automations before officially implementing them? First of all, thank you for acknowledging you are going to fail a lot. At the beginning, like a lot. And it is a little hard to take, because most people that are drawn to this are perfectionists. I know I am. And so when you really suck at something, it sort of sucks at first. I'm not going to lie. But I also love like the challenge and like overcoming that as well. But here's my sort of hot tips, and then I will see if others want to layer on. So one, Brooke, and others that are out there that are scared of this, let's make sure that you have an environment first that you can work in, that is a safe space for you to fail without touching your Blackbaud production environment. So you can get access to what we call the Sky Developer Cohort environment. This is a free shared developer environment. It's going to have a sample data set in it. It's being used by hundreds of developers today. to test their applications and their integrations. So I would recommend, and I'm going to get the link and post it in the chat while I let others talk, that you request this and then use that to connect. It's already pre-connected to the Microsoft Power Platform. So you don't have to connect any Microsoft Power Platform app from the marketplace to it. And then use this. Also, don't like flow checker and like compulsively testing flows over and over and over again is the name of the game, not just when you're getting started, but always. So you're going to iteratively move through and get a little success and then kind of move on. So that's my hot tip, and I'll post the link in the chat about getting that Sky Developer cohort, and see if anybody else wants to provide an answer.
I agree with everything Heather has said. In addition to that, I would say think about your idea in the bigger sense and then break it down to the elements that need to work in order for the flow to be successful, and build those first and get it fully functioning and operating. Then copy it, because you need to keep track of versions in case you break something, you have something to go back to. And then do like phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and evolve it up to what your original idea was, but to go in stages. A colleague of mine, Stacy Cope, we did a series of 3 skills labs in 2022. I'm going to go search YouTube and see if I can find the links to those recordings, because we talked about this in a basically 3-day, total 3 hours of how to take an idea and all the steps to go into it and how you end up with your flow and all the things involved.
It's a good tip and a reminder that our Sky Developer YouTube channel, all of the content from BB Dev Days past, including the skills labs, are now up on that YouTube channel. So do not ignore past BB Dev Days. And then in several weeks from now, we'll get the content from this year's session up there, so that everyone can benefit from it. So thank you, Brooke. I hope that helps you on your question. I'm going to tease some announcements, breaking news. I'm going to put the safe harbor statement in place, make all future buying decisions about Blackbaud based on what's available now. But now I'm just going to go for it. So Patty, thank you for your question. I'll talk about some coming soon news, and then maybe I think Glen on the stage has the most experience with FE NXT and Power Automate. So maybe let you add a few comments. So the Financial Edge NXT team, hopefully you saw Haley's session talking about payables and payables API, but we've got a couple of new connectors coming out for Financial Edge NXT. Right now, we've got a custom connector that one of our sponsors and partners, MP Automate, has available in the template showcase. But we're also coming out with several certified connectors from Blackbaud. So the first one that will come out for Financial Edge alongside Razor's Edge is the query connector. So that is coming very soon. And then we have connectors that are planned and in development right now for both payables and general ledger batch. So there are some new connectors coming out. But Glen, you've worked on a couple of FE processes. You want to lay down some inspiration for FE?
Yeah, so the nice thing is, though, as Heather mentioned, we've got a number of these connectors coming out. If you want to start working on FE NXT now, then the HTTP, I forgot what it was called already, but the session we talked about earlier in this chat, as far as the HTTP item, will go in and get you started as far as, hey, let me go ahead and start creating things that through more of our generic connection. The one thing to keep in mind is that make sure you need to be very aware of the structure of your accounts, your T codes, maybe even your grants, and how all that does. You have to be very aware of how all that interacts within your Financial Edge system, because everything it's more of an onion than the Razor's Edge side is, because you've got transactions, you've got the distribution sets and things like that. So before diving into creating these flows, if there's going to be anything that is touching any times transactions, just make sure you have a chance to review how all that interacts within your system. Certainly, we have the cohort that for FENXT that Heather had mentioned as well, but it's, everybody's setup for FE is even more varied than for Razor's Edge. So that would be my advice, is that certainly you've got the options to do it if you've already started working with these other solutions. The YouTube channels and stuff like that, even though a lot of them are geared toward RE, a lot of the concepts are going to be the same. But again, just having a good, overall idea and acknowledgement about what your account structure is, your T codes and things like that, before just diving in would kind of help you prepare. Because I dove in without reviewing all that stuff, and I chased my own tail for a while. So I guess I don't do what I did.
Good advice. Anybody else want to add anything to the FE question? All right, then thank you, Patty. Hopefully we helped you on your way. We've got about 5 minutes left, so keep your questions coming in. We've got one here in the queue. Let's see. I don't know if you guys have experienced this or not, but I'll throw it up on the board. And if anybody here in the chat has had this experience, then help James out. Has anyone else noticed something buggy in Power Automate where if you insert dynamic content within a field, it removes the preceding character? So this hit me hard yesterday while trying to set up Sky add-in and having a slash removed from the relative path. Has anybody else experienced any sort of bugginess there? Okay, Glenn. So James, you're not the only one. Glenn, let's hear it.
I've noticed it, and a few of the people have mentioned this as well. When you get into those crazy scenarios, whether it be for that, another option is when you're trying to create the HTML tables. I keep a notepad open all the time. That I got those things like those little character strings and stuff that keeps getting deleted. I type in a notepad first, and then I copy and paste it in like right before. Like I put the dynamic content in first, and then from my notepad I copy and paste the before and after, so it doesn't delete that. Yes, it's you're not the yes, James. Not going crazy, at least over this. But yeah, so those will be those tricks like that you're gonna run into. Like I said, oftentimes when I run into those issues, I've got a notepad open, and then just other people may have other techniques. I just like type in a notepad and then copy and paste those other pieces so that the dynamic content doesn't blow it away.
I mean, I do the same thing, particularly for like filter, the data operations filter array action. If you're in the advanced and you're trying to put things together, very difficult to do that within the available fields. So I use a notepad to the point where if I open the notepad on my computer, it's just a series of things I've done for random flows, and I use it as like a whiteboard type.
And to get, And to get a bit more techie, if you want to go out there, this is available for both Mac and PC, Visual Studio Code, not Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code. And what that is that when you start really working with things such as JSON and stuff like that, and there's other editors like that, I just like the Visual Studio Code, its editor will help you format and work with some of those more complicated things such as the JSON and other functions. It'll tell you where things are wrong if you're trying to put it together. It'll help format it for you. It gives you the red lines if you've got stuff wrong. So, especially as the notepad is really great, but as you start getting more and more in depth and working with more of the advanced options, those editors such as Visual Studio Code, free download, can be helpful as far as trying to wrap your head around what's going on.
Wonderful. So I'm just going to, we're just about out of time. So I am going to do a plug for some upcoming workshops that we have. So if you are looking for an in-person training experience and you're going to be somewhere near Washington, D.C., or Atlanta coming up later this fall. We do have in-person workshops planned for both Power Automate and for Power BI tracks. So please, we'd love to see you, especially if you're looking to get started. It can be a great opportunity because, you'll have Glen and Ashley and our colleague Rebecca and Eric on hand for the coaching. We'll work through a number of different beginner use cases and set you up for success, as it were. So we hope to see you at one of these future events. We'll also be doing some pre-conference workshops at BBCon. So if you are going to be coming to Seattle, you can always tack on the University Day, Developer Workshop Day there in Seattle. So I'm supposed to hit the poll so we can, let's see, the survey. I'm supposed to launch the survey. Give us good feedback, folks. We want to see you back here next year. And we got to make Eric proud. So give us some good feedback and have the rest of BB Dev Days and day 3 closeout. Thanks so much.